said your first time out writing a book wasn't very good. What
It
was
was
not so
not.
good about it?
I was very I wrote this novel. It was a science fiction novel. It was called Earthstrike Agenda. It ended up being like a novella size. And there was just a lot in there that was just it was cliche ridden. The characters were two-dimensional. There were story elements things I just didn't know because I had no formal training. So it was just reading over it later, there's just a lot of hackneyed, you
Sure.
know, I'm not enjoying it. Now,
Oh,
I did go back and rewrite that novel years later and
okay.
published it. And it went from being like a book this thick to a book this thick.
Okay.
But I had learned things about writing characters and coming up with characters. But I liked the plot. I liked the plot that I had come up with. And so I rewrote it and eventually published it. But the first time around, it was just, you could see where I was pulling the inspiration from. Oh, that's a Star Trek thing. Oh, that's a Star Wars thing. It's all, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see where I copied that idea from. And
Yeah,
but I was
exactly.
learning.
Yeah.
I didn't know, I didn't know how to do certain things. I hadn't figured out how to trust the characters. I hadn't figured out how not to be repetitive. That's still a thing. My first drafts, that's one thing editors are always grabbing. It's like you're using this word over and over and over again.
Hmm.
Stop. You know, things like that. Not you know pacing and things that just tricks you learn as you go along about how to slow down a story or speed up a story or when to cut, point of view. It was called Earthstrike Agenda. It's been out. It came out in 2010, 2009, 2010, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
So it was my first foray into writing a science fiction novel. And I have not written another science fiction novel since then. I've written some science fiction short stories, but I've had this idea with the character in the back of my head that one day I'll write another story that in that universe. I just haven't got there yet.
Yeah. Do you write for different age groups like PG-13 or restricted or language? You go back and
Yeah,
forth?
certain things. I mean, most of my stuff is good for teenagers and up. But with things like Evil Ways, certainly, or Evil Intent, because they are more adult, there's a bit more language.
Hmm.
There's a sex scene in one of them.
Yeah.
Um, but for stuff like Snow, I tend to keep that more of a PG-13. I have a character called Lance Starr, which is more of an action adventure thing. It's like imagine if Indiana Jones was a pilot. He's getting that kind of feel. And those I tend to write more, 9, 10-year-olds probably could read it. So it's yeah, so I kind of am cognizant of that. I don't want to, I don't try to drop F-bombs in certain types of stories, um, because not every story needs that. If it's,
Yeah, exactly.
if it needs it, great, we'll
Sure.
do it.
Yeah.
Like I think in 6, 7 books of Snow, I think there's one F-bomb. And it was just like it was the only word that fit.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, but other than that, it's very yeah, I'm cognizant of the age group, especially when I do a series. If I'm doing them all PG-13, I don't want to all of a sudden do an R-rated version of
Yeah, sure. Of
book
course not. Yeah.
and then go back because that throws your audience. And so yeah, so I kind of that PG-13 is where I am most of the time. Like I said, certain books, certainly Evil Ways, Suicide Bomb, those things were more R-rated, just because there are just a little more adult things to them.
Yeah.
And usually it involves sex or certain themes. It's not violence. People don't really seem to care about violence, so violence can be in the PG-13 things, no problem. But the books like Evil Ways or Suicide Bomb, where I'm killing a lot of people in very nasty ways, those
Sure.
tend to be more adult.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Whereas in somebody dies in Snow or Sheriff Myers, it's not as graphic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it's the difference between watching a movie about a murder and watching a TV show about murder.
Yeah,
The TV show is not quite as gruesome.
sure.
Yeah,
These
which
days,
sometimes works better because the audience fills in those gaps and makes it feel worse than it is. Yeah.
yeah. Any drug references at all in your stories?
Not a lot. I have one where one of the Snow books, there is a character who has a drug problem that leads to her death. That he is investigating to find out what happened.
Yeah.
So yes, in that case I do, but for the most part, I wrote one thing. I think one time I did one where a guy was a drug smuggler. But yeah, it's not like none of my main characters are like drug addicts or anything like that. I mean, what they all have their problems. None of my you don't want any of your characters to be perfect.
Yeah.
But yeah, so far the drugs have just been a small part. I do find myself, and this is one of those repetitive things that I don't realize I'm doing at the time, but in several different books, I've had references to people trying to quit smoking. And I don't know why, it just seemed to fit those characters. So things like that. But but nothing overly, like I haven't done except, like I said, except for that one where drugs played a role in her dying.
Yeah.
Drugs have not been at the forefront of too many of my stories.
Okay. And they have basically happy endings in most cases?
Most cases, there are a couple where you have that little twist. Like I did write one novel where it has a happy ending, but the bad guy got away.
Okay.
And so just because I may bring them back later, it's so
Right.
I have that little bit on the end,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
or sometimes you have ambiguous endings. But I always like to, yeah, leave it where my characters, especially the main characters, at least come out of it, you know, if not happy, certainly in a better place than they were during the book.
Okay.
And a lot of times that depends on the book as well.
Yeah.
Some are, and sometimes you have twists that are not necessarily with the main character, but with the villain. Like I have one book where we have the nice happy roundup, but then the villain, something happens, and we find out that something happens to the villain kind of after it's wrapped up. And it almost makes you feel a little sorry for the villain. But it's just one of those twists that makes the story work. But yeah, but I know I like to make sure we close the case or catch the bad guy, or I'm and I try to be different about it through book, like movies. A lot of times you kill the villain at the end. That's, I try not to do that all the time. There are times when the villain needs to be arrested, or because it just seems too pat to you just kill him. And so deciding what to do in those cases and which characters are more willing to do that. Like Sheriff Myers is not a shoot first kind of guy. He would much rather just arrest the bad guys than shoot them.
Yeah.
Whereas Snow, yeah, I'll shoot him. you he may not want to try to kill him, but he might shoot, but he's definitely going to shoot him.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So a lot of it comes down to who the characters are and what type of book you're doing. Like obviously the horror Western, even though there's a good turnout at the end, we're still in the Wild West. There's still horror. There's still, because there's another book coming. So you can't like get rid of all the horror because there's another book coming. So yeah, so it's fun to play with those, and you kind of have your happy endings in small doses, not just at the end of, because there's going to be, because I can't like solve all the problems at the end of book one, because then book two would have been very boring.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So, I mean, I was going to ask you, what are you working on? It sounds like this is what you're working on.
Yeah, right now I'm doing, on my to-do list right now, I have 3 short stories for various publishers to do, and I'm working on a comic script, and I'm working on Snow #7 and Deadly Deals, which is the sequel to Deadly Games. The Snow and the Deadly Games, I do a chapter a week because I'm releasing them a chapter a week on Patreon for our patrons.
Okay.
And so I'm writing those kind of slowly because I'm releasing them that way. And then as they get done, almost like beta readers, and then when they get done, I'll release them. But right now I'm doing these short stories, and the goal is to get them done by the end of this month. And then next month I start on the one I mentioned earlier that I'm in the research process now. But I always have multiple stories going. I reach a point when I'm writing, I tend to go, I'll work a little bit, and I'm like, okay, I've gotten to the end of the chapter, or I've gotten to a point where I'm kind of done with this for the day. I'm done with this story for the day. And I can either quit, or I can jump over here and work on this story, and I still feel fresh because I haven't worked on that today. So juggling multiple projects allows me to kind of work longer throughout the day. So, and that's something that's just worked for me. I gather it's not for everybody, but yeah, that helps me. And that way I can get more work done during the day. And because I tend to overload myself, I take on more than I can really do. And I guess I am my own worst enemy there. But yeah. So
I can do that with music. I can juggle all kinds of different projects, but I'm too new at writing. It's only been, like I said, 5 years, and I've in a sort of a fantasy world, and yet I've got an idea and my stories have happy endings, but I would love to write something Kafkaesque. I have this storyline that things just go from bad to worse, and that's just the way it is. And I'm wondering if I'm talented enough to do that after writing happy endings. That's why I asked the question.
It's a good challenge. I mean, now, are you writing novels or short stories
Novels,
or
yeah.
novels? Okay.
I've written 3.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, sometimes when you do, and that's part of the reason I do multiple genres. After a while, okay, I've written like all this crime fiction. I just want to get in a spaceship and do something, you know. And so sometimes it's just a nice break to give your brain a chance to kind of recharge, and think up clever new ways of killing people while you're over here, flying around in a spaceship or something. But yeah, I set challenges for myself to sometimes try things that I'm not sure if I can do or not. Like years ago, there was a book series called Fight Card, and it was boxing novels set in the 1950s. And different writers were writing different characters, but they were all set in the 50s because at one point, the conceit was at one point, every character in the book went through one particular gym at least once. And they met it was in Chicago. It was a preacher who ran a gym, and the preacher would teach people how to box. So at one point, every main character met that guy. And so I didn't know what I knew about boxing. I had seen in a Rocky movie. But it was one of those things when the offer came to do it, was to come up with a story that not only fit the tone of what they were doing, but told a story that I would want to tell. And that one's more of a drama story, which I had not done a lot of. So it was kind of a challenge to myself to take it on and do it. And there were moments where I thought I shouldn't have said yes to this. But the more I worked it and the more I trusted the characters, we came out with a story that I'm very proud of. It's a very personal, character-driven story that I still blow stuff up, and there's because part of it the guy in my story ends up in Korea during the Korean War.
Okay.
And so where he's entered into during one of the ceasefires, he has entered into a boxing match where two of the different camps get together to have and they're in the boxing ring when the ceasefire ends, and so stuff, but and then we go back in and we see his past and how he got there, and it was just this wonderful drama story that I never would have, if it was left up to me, if I had not been invited, I never would have wrote that story, because it was not the kind of thing I do.
Okay.
So sometimes those challenges can be fun. They're frustrating, but they can be fun, you know.
With
And
enough research, I suppose, you know, if you, they say write what you know. I know quite a
mhm,
bit, but what if I want to write about stuff that I don't know? Like if I had, I don't have any guns in my
right,
books. This idea that I have, there's going to be plenty of guns, and for me to, I don't know about guns. You know, I
yeah.
don't, but I'd have to like research
Well,
how many
well,
bullets fit into what millimeter
yeah.
and what. Do you do research like that to make sure that
Oh,
the
abs
reader understands that the 9 millimeter gun operates in this particular way?
a lot of times. Sometimes I just say gun,
Okay.
and we're good. But if it's a specific gun, absolutely.
Yeah.
One thing I've learned about research, and research online is a wonderful tool, but I've also learned that people who do those jobs that you're wanting to research, 99% of the time are more than happy to sit down and tell you whatever you want to know. Over the course of the last, I don't know, decade or so, maybe longer now, I spent a day with the FBI. I've spent time with SWAT officers. I've spent time with police officers, lawyers, doctors. The pandemic screwed up my visit to the medical examiner, so I'm hoping we can get that back on the books. You know, where I could go and just talk to them, get a feel, not only talk to them, but get a feel of what the place is like. You know, I've seen a morgue on TV and movies, and that gives you an inkling, but I've never been in one. What does it feel like? What is the, you know, I understand they're very cold. You know, what does it feel like in there? What is it? So those
Yeah,
are things. And
exactly.
you,
Yeah.
yeah. And so people will tell you, you know, we met a forensic photographer at a convention. We were at a convention and this guy's up, you know, just looking at books and we're all just chit chatting. And we find out this guy's a forensic photographer. And we're like, okay, we have questions, you know. And he was like, oh, yeah. And so he's telling us all kind of things, gives us his card and says, you got questions, just call me. And so, yeah, so people love to talk about what they do. I spent time with a Secret Service agent. Like I said, I spent a day with the FBI. I learned a ton about, you know, not only what they do, but what kind of people are there. I also do a little acting on the side. And I was in the pilot. I'm not the star, I'm just there. But I played an FBI agent in the pilot episode of a show called The Following, which starred Kevin Bacon, where he was an FBI profiler. And so I was there. I worked for like 3 days on this show. And on the last day, I'm there in my FBI get up and we're just kind of hanging around waiting to do stuff. And there's a real life FBI agent shows up to consult. And so I'm like, you know what? Evil Ways is about an FBI agent. I wrote a
Perfect.
novel about an FBI agent. So I go up, I introduce myself, I tell him
Why
what I've done.
not?
I said, I'd love to pick your brain. And he goes, okay. He gives me his card and he says, there's a process. So you have to get the background check and all, you know. And so I go on about my business. About a month later, I get a call from someone at FBI headquarters, and I talked to a wonderful agent there, and you know, she was like, we're going to grant you time to go speak with our agent down there. He's our public relations agent, and so you can have an hour. Like, okay. So I make the appointment with him to go in, and I go in and I go to meet with them, and I'm kind of a little surprised because I get there because we see FBI offices in movies and TV, and they're all these fancy high tech,
Mm-hmm.
you know, ultra modern. This is an office building. It's been there 30, 40 years at this point, you know. But I go in, we talk for a bit. He gives me a bunch of, you know, stuff about, you know, how they work, some literature to study, and we just talk in generalities for a little while, and then so I said, well, I have some story specific questions. And he goes, okay. So I mentioned, you know, this may be a spoiler for Evil Ways, but at the end of it, the main character gets shot. Not, he's not fatally wounded, but he gets shot. And so I'm like, so I'm curious about the process after an officer, an agent is shot. And he goes, oh, well, let me tell you about the time I got shot. And he goes and launches into this story, which could have been a movie on its own.
Wow.
And so he was telling me all this stuff, and a lot of that made it into Evil Intent. A lot of the details of what he went through, and so it was fun. And we ended up having a wonderful day. I ended up being there like 5 or 6 hours, we had a wonderful time. And that's where I learned what a skiff room was long before I ever saw it on TV. But the biggest surprise to me was in one of the little alcoves in the hallway. The FBI has a trophy room. And I was like, oh, it's like Batman. You've collected, you know. And so he's pointing things out, and he's like, you remember the Centennial Olympic bomb? That's it. That's it after we put it back together. That's from this case. This is from that. And he's this, and they've got it all there where they've collected all the evidence, you know, because to understand how the bomb works, you have to find all the tiny pieces and put it back together.
Yeah.
And so just seeing all of that was really fascinating.
Of course.
Just, yeah.
Yeah.
I have a friend who is an ER doctor. He's also an author. You know, that helped. Like if I have a friend who is a retired police investigator.
Yeah.
If I have certain questions, I have a friend that's active police, and like one's in California, one's in New York, and I was like, hey, what is, I'm stuck on, I can't find out what do you call this? What's the not the technical term for it, but what do the guys on the street call this device?
Sure.
Oh, it's this,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of that can go on, of just people.
Just be part of a community of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, most people are thrilled to talk about what they do for a living, because most people's families don't, they've heard it all. They don't care. Like I could talk to my family about writing. Nobody cares.
That's right.
But I have friends I can talk to about writing, and yeah, you're right. Community is very important. I know, and just the community of creative people, who can help you, talk you off that creative ledge sometimes, because we all have those moments.
Yeah.
Or that celebrates the wins. We're not competing against each other. So if I have a friend who makes a great book deal or whatever, we're thrilled for them. So we're supporting and celebrating each other, and sometimes that comes in the form of, hey, by the way, this company's looking for short stories. You should, I gave them your name, or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I've gotten work like that where, and I've done it too. It's like somebody asked me, it's like, I don't have room in my schedule. Let me recommend you somebody.
Yeah.
And so it becomes this community of what we're of not just writers, but creators. I mean, I'm all the time sending people toward some of the cover artists that I work with, or different publishers that I know are looking for something they can do. And it's like, talk to these people. So yeah, so it's a wonderful little community of people, and yeah, but they're, like I said, it's in terms of research, most people love to talk about their jobs.
Well, it's been quite the conversation. I think we're going to wrap
you.
it up.
I've had a good time.
And, it sure was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you. I've had a good time. It was fun.
Yeah, it was. Okay, Bobby, I wish you well in the future, and you take care of yourself.
Thank you very much. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that concludes this episode of Tell Me About Your Book. If you like what I do here on this show, then please hit the like button and subscribe. Don't forget to ring that bell for future notifications. And if you are a self-published author, then please contact me. I would love to speak with you. Until such time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.